Ancient civilizations did not stop at the water's edge. They built entirely new land in the sea. Across the globe, from windswept Scottish lochs to tropical Pacific reefs, our ancestors performed a remarkable feat of early coastal engineering. They constructed artificial island settlements, permanent communities rising from the water through sheer ingenuity and effort. This was not a rare event, but a widespread phenomenon, a hidden chapter in humanity's drive to shape its world. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the 30 most astonishing examples of these man-made archipelagos and the common thread of ambition that connects them. We will uncover why a culture would choose such a monumental task, how they managed it with ancient tools, and what ultimately caused many of these aquatic kingdoms to sink back into silence. What does it truly mean for a society to build its future on water? These were not mere docks or fishing platforms extending from the shore. An ancient artificial island settlement represents something far more profound, a deliberate act of world building. It begins with a fundamental choice to create stable land where none existed before, using only the materials and knowledge available thousands of years ago. The core technique was deceptively simple in concept, yet staggering in its execution. Communities would gather countless stones, from fist-sized rocks to massive boulders, and transport them into the water, piling them layer upon layer until a foundation rose above the waves. They mixed in sediment, clay, and vast quantities of organic material like brushwood, peat, and even midden waste, which over time would compact into a solid, fertile matrix. In other regions, the method involved sophisticated carpentry, building immense wooden frameworks or stone cribs that were sunk into place and then filled. Some cultures even used woven baskets of reeds loaded with rocks as modular building blocks for their aquatic foundations. The goal was always the same: to forge a permanent, habitable expansion of their world. This was not land reclamation in the modern sense of draining a swamp or pushing back the sea with steel and concrete. This was the opposite, a purposeful move into the aquatic realm to construct entirely new ground for homes, for safety, and for community. They were building the future one stone, one basket, one log at a time, on a foundation they had to invent from scratch. But why would a society choose this path? The immense labor required to build an island from nothing suggests a powerful, even urgent motivation. The reasons were as diverse as the cultures themselves, yet they often converged on a few powerful themes. For many, it was about security. An island settlement surrounded by water was a natural fortress. It provided a formidable barrier against land-based rivals, wild animals, or larger, more aggressive neighboring groups. The water itself became a moat, turning a simple community into a nearly impregnable stronghold. Control was another powerful driver. A strategically placed artificial island could dominate a vital river mouth, a narrow strait, or a rich fishing ground. It became a toll booth, a trading hub, and a watchtower all in one, allowing its builders to command the flow of goods, people, and wealth across the water. This control often fed into social structure. These engineered lands sometimes became exclusive enclaves, homes for ruling elites, priests, or skilled artisans, physically separated from the broader population on the mainland. The very act of building an island could reinforce social order and display a leader's power to command such a project. For others, the motivation was deeply spiritual. Water has always held sacred meaning, seen as a source of life, a boundary to the afterlife, or a home to deities. Building a community upon it was an act of profound connection, creating a ceremonial space set apart from the ordinary world. And sometimes the reason was simply practical necessity. Faced with growing populations and limited fertile land, or perhaps the threat of flooding from rivers or the sea, communities saw expansion into the water as their only viable future. They were not retreating, but ingeniously creating new territory where none was offered. As we explore specific islands, watch for these motivations. They are the key to understanding the minds of the builders. The evidence for this ancient ambition is written across the map of the world itself. From the cold, peat-dark lochs of Scotland to the sun-drenched atolls of the Pacific, cultures with no possible contact independently arrived at the same revolutionary idea. They looked at the water and saw not a barrier but a blank canvas. This was not a technology that spread from a single source like the wheel or metallurgy. Instead, it represents a stunning case of convergent human innovation, where separate societies facing similar challenges devised remarkably similar solutions. We find their work in the stone-built Crannogs of Ireland and Scotland, the mysterious Nuraghi of Sardinia, and the turp mounds of the North Sea coast. We see it in the intricate Chinampas of ancient Mexico, the stilt villages over Southeast Asian lakes, and the monumental coral and basalt platforms of Polynesian chiefs. The Mediterranean, the British Isles, the Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia, and the Americas all host their own chapters in this global story. This widespread pattern begs a profound question. Was it simply a logical engineering solution, or does it point to something deeper, a universal human impulse to expand, to secure, and to redefine the very meaning of home? When the same answer emerges independently across continents and millennia, we are no longer looking at a curious historical footnote, but at a fundamental thread in the fabric of human ingenuity. Perhaps the clearest window into this ancient mindset is found in the misty lochs and quiet marshes of Scotland and Ireland. Here, for thousands of years, communities built the crannog, a type of artificial island that became the heart of family life and power. To create one, builders would first select a strategic spot in a lake, often near a natural island or a shallow shelf. They then drove wooden piles into the lakebed to mark a circular area, sometimes over 50 feet across. Inside this ring, they painstakingly piled layer upon layer of stone, timber, and brushwood, often bringing material by boat from the shores. They mixed in clay, peat, and even domestic waste, which compacted over time into a surprisingly stable foundation. On top of this man-made mound, they constructed a roundhouse, typically of wood with a conical thatched roof, surrounded by a protective wooden palisade. A narrow, often hidden, causeway or a simple wooden jetty for canoes connected this island fortress to the mainland, a link that could be easily defended or removed. These were not temporary shelters but permanent, fortified homesteads. A crannog was a statement of security and status, a visible declaration that a family commanded the resources and labor to carve out its own sovereign territory from the water. The effort required was immense, representing a lifetime's investment for a chieftain and his kin. Beyond defense, crannogs were vibrant centers of daily life. Archaeological finds reveal they were hubs for sophisticated metalworking, bone carving, and textile production. The waterlogged conditions of these sites have preserved organic materials that normally rot away on land, giving us an unparalleled snapshot of ancient craft. We find delicate wooden bowls, intricate jewelry, and even butter preserved in wooden containers, left in the cool water beneath the floorboards. Some of these island homes show evidence of use for 1,000 years or more, passed down through generations, repaired and rebuilt, standing as enduring monuments to a society that chose to build its future upon the water. While the crannog builders worked with wood and earth, another culture in Scotland's northern and western reaches chose a far more permanent material to make their stand against the sea. Rising from rocky tidal islets and commanding coastal promontories are the brocks and island duns, monumental stone towers that represent the pinnacle of Iron Age defensive architecture. These are not the organic, mounded homesteads of the lochs, but stark, imposing fortresses of drystone masonry. The distinction is important. A dun is a smaller, thick-walled stone enclosure, often built on a coastal cliff or, most intriguingly, on a small, wave-lashed island just offshore. A broch, however, is a true architectural marvel, a complex, hollow-walled tower that could reach over 40 feet in height, with internal stairs and galleries built within the double walls themselves. Some of the most dramatic examples are found in places like the Hebrides, where builders did not always start from open water. Instead, they often selected a natural skerry, a small, rocky islet exposed at low tide, and transformed it. They would build a causeway of stone to connect it to the mainland, or sometimes deliberately leave it isolated, accessible only by boat when the tide was high. Then, upon that wave-washed rock, they would carefully lay stone upon stone without any mortar, constructing walls so precisely fitted they have endured for over 2,000 years of Atlantic storms. Their primary purpose was unmistakably defensive. The broch tower, visible for miles, was a symbol of power and a deterrent. Its height allowed lookouts to spot approaching boats long before they could land, while its narrow, easily defended entrance and thick walls made direct assault a daunting prospect. In a society where rivalry and raiding were constant realities, these structures were less about creating new living space like the Crannogs, and more about securing and proclaiming control over the most valuable coastal territories, the best landing sites, and the richest fishing grounds. They were the Iron Age equivalent of a castle keep, a stone declaration of sovereignty where the sea itself became part of the fortress walls. Standing in the shadow of one today, you are not just looking at a ruin, but at the calculated strategy of a people who used stone and tried to write their presence permanently onto the landscape. Moving south from the stone towers of Scotland, we find a different kind of waterborne life in the vast, misty wetlands of ancient England. The Somerset levels, a sprawling landscape of marshes and shallow lakes 2,000 years ago, were home to communities that mastered a softer, more organic form of island engineering. At Glastonbury and Mere, the Iron Age inhabitants did not fight the water. They adapted to it with breathtaking ingenuity. They built their villages not on solid ground, but on a series of man-made mounds rising like hillocks from the reed beds. Each mound was a carefully engineered platform, constructed from layers of clay, timber, brushwood, and even the discarded shells and bones of daily life. This was not a haphazard pile of debris. It was a deliberate foundation designed to remain stable in the ever-shifting peat and water. Upon these artificial islands, they erected sturdy roundhouses with woven wattle walls and thick thatched roofs, connecting the homes with raised wooden walkways that snaked across the soggy ground. A strong timber palisade often surrounded the entire settlement, turning it into a secure, cohesive community floating in the marsh. The sophistication of their woodworking is astounding. Archaeologists have recovered perfectly crafted wooden handles, intricate wheels, and even sections of finely fitted flooring, all preserved for millennia in the oxygen-poor peat. These were not primitive huts, they were the well-planned homes of a people deeply in tune with their environment. Their entire economy was shaped by the water that surrounded them. They were expert fishermen using nets and traps woven from willow, and skilled hunters of the waterfowl that flocked to the marshes, but they were also connected to a wider world. The discovery of glass beads from the Mediterranean and finely worked metal from distant British tribes tells a story of trade. These lake villages were not isolated backwaters. They were likely bustling hubs where local resources like salt, fish, and expertly crafted woodwork were exchanged for luxury goods and raw materials from across Europe. They thrived by embracing the wetland, turning a landscape that would seem hostile to us into a source of abundance, security, and connection. The story of artificial settlements takes a fascinating turn inland, far from the open sea or misty lochs. In the fertile floodplain of Italy's Po Valley, over 3,000 years ago, a sophisticated Bronze Age culture performed a different kind of landscape engineering. They built the terramare, a name derived from local dialect meaning rich earth. These were not islands in water, but islands on land, immense artificial mounds constructed to rise above the swampy, flood-prone terrain of the valley. The parallel to the island builders is striking. Faced with a challenging environment, they did not retreat. They transformed it using a nearly identical principle. To create a terramare, workers first laid down a massive foundation of wooden beams and piles, creating a huge rectangular frame right on the soggy ground. This colossal wooden crate was then filled, layer by layer, with earth, clay, and a carefully selected mixture of organic material and settlement debris. The result was a towering, flat-topped platform, sometimes encompassing dozens of acres, standing high and dry above the surrounding marshes. It was a man-made hill, an engineered territory that provided safe, stable ground for an entire planned community. What makes the terramare settlements truly extraordinary is their layout. Unlike the organic growth of most ancient villages, these were meticulously designed with a rigid grid pattern of streets, dividing the platform into neat rectangular blocks. Homes were built of wood and clay on stone foundations, aligned perfectly with the streets, suggesting a highly organized society with shared rules and a powerful central authority. They were skilled metalworkers, farmers, and traders connected to networks across Europe. Yet, the mystery of the terramare is as profound as their construction. After thriving for centuries, around 1,200 years before the Common Era, all of these settlements were abruptly and completely abandoned. The people vanished, leaving their carefully engineered mounds silent. Researchers have long debated the cause. Some suggest a severe ecological crisis, perhaps the water table rising or the surrounding land becoming too swampy even for their platforms. Others point to possible social upheaval or outside pressure. The truth is, we do not yet know. Their sudden departure left behind a haunting legacy, a reminder that even the most ingenious human creations are part of a delicate balance with the natural world they seek to conquer. While the terramare builders raised earth to escape water, other Alpine communities chose a more daring approach, building their homes directly upon its surface. Encircling the Great Lakes and quiet backwaters of the Alps from Switzerland across to Slovenia lie the silent remains of the Folberton, the extraordinary pile dwellings. These were entire villages constructed not on solid ground, but on intricate platforms of timber, supported by thousands of wooden piles driven deep into the soft lakebed or wetland shore. Imagine walking along a lakeshore 5,000 years ago and seeing not just a settlement, but a delicate, man-made archipelago of wooden houses connected to land by narrow, swaying footbridges. The sound of the water would have been a constant presence, lapping beneath the floorboards, a reminder of the ingenious and perhaps precarious balance these people maintained. Their choice of location was strategic, offering natural defense from animals and other groups, easy access to fishing and waterfowl, and proximity to the rich resources of the forests and meadows. But it is not their construction alone that captures our imagination. It is what time and water have preserved. The cold, oxygen-poor mud beneath these sites has acted as a perfect time capsule. Organic materials that vanish without a trace on dry land have survived here in stunning detail. We are not left guessing about their daily lives, we can see it. Archaeologists have recovered finely woven baskets still holding grain, wooden bows with their strings intact, and clothing made from woven flax and bark fibers. We can study their meals from fish bones and nutshells, even identify the kinds of apples they enjoyed. The preservation is so complete that researchers can analyze tool marks on wooden handles, trace the design of a clay pot back to the individual potter's fingerprints, and map out entire village layouts from the patterns of the sunken posts. This is not just archaeology, it is a direct window offering a full-color, tactile snapshot of Neolithic and Bronze Age existence. We see not a primitive struggle, but a society of remarkable skill and adaptation, living in harmony with, and literally on top of, the water that defined their world. The story of Venice did not begin with grand palaces and bustling piazzas. It was born from necessity in the quiet, shifting mudflats of its lagoons centuries earlier. As the Roman Empire fragmented in the 5th and 6th centuries, waves of people sought refuge from the conflict and upheaval sweeping across the mainland of Italy. They looked toward the shallow, protected waters of the Venetian lagoon, a maze of salt marshes, tidal channels, and unstable islands. This was not a welcoming landscape for a city, but it was a defensible one, a place where the water itself could be a shield. The first communities did not find a ready-made home, they had to invent it from nothing. On low islands like Torcello and Mazzorbo, they began the painstaking work of transforming soggy ground into habitable land. Using techniques that echoed ancient builders across the globe, they drove wooden piles into the compacted clay of the lagoon bed to create stable foundations. They dug networks of canals to drain areas and provide transport routes, piling the dredged sediment onto designated plots to raise the ground level above the high tide. They constructed platforms of wood and stone, creating the first embryonic campos or squares, around which simple wooden homes and churches were built. This was a humble, pragmatic beginning, a society of refugees mastering the unstable environment through collective effort. They were not yet building a masterpiece of architecture, they were solving a basic problem of survival, learning to live with the rhythm of the tides. The Church of Santa Fosca on Torcello, with its serene Byzantine lines, stands as a quiet monument to this foundational era, a testament to the community that first decided the future was not on solid ground, but in the careful, deliberate conquest of the water. Every canal dug and every platform built in those early centuries was a rehearsal, a slow accumulation of knowledge that would one day allow their descendants to perform the miracle of Venice itself. This drive to build defensible high ground reached a fever pitch centuries later with the arrival of the Normans. Their signature fortification, the Motte and Bailey Castle, was a masterclass in rapid territorial control, and its core principle was the creation of an artificial island of earth. While often built inland, the concept is a direct descendant of the ancient mound builders' logic. When a Norman lord claimed a new territory, especially in a contested coastal marsh or along a vital river, his first order was often to build a mound or motte. This was not always a natural hill. Frequently, it was a completely man-made earthen tower, constructed by digging a deep, wide ditch and piling that soil into a steep, flat-topped hill. This massive undertaking created an instant fortress. The motte became an isolated stronghold, surrounded by its own watery moat, accessible only by a single, heavily guarded bridge. At its summit sat a wooden tower, a final redoubt for the lord and his knights. Below, the enclosed bailey yard housed barracks, stables, and workshops, all protected by a wooden palisade and the outer ditch. In marshy coastal regions like those in southeast England or Normandy itself, this technique was particularly effective. The wet ground made digging the ditch easier and ensured it filled with water, enhancing the defensive moat. The newly raised motte provided a dry, commanding view over the otherwise flat, flood-prone landscape. It was a statement of power built literally from the ground up, or more accurately, from the ditch down. This was not a slow, organic community project like a Crannog. It was a swift, military-engineered imposition, designed to dominate a landscape and its people from day one. The motte transformed the ancient idea of the defensive island into a standardized tool of conquest, proving that whether in stone, wood, or simple packed earth, the urge to secure territory by creating your own high ground is a timeless thread in the story of human settlement. Across the world and millennia, the same ambition found its ultimate expression in a place of staggering scale and mystery. On the remote island of Pohnpei in the Pacific, the ruins of Nan Madol rise from a coral reef like a forgotten dream of stone. This was not a village or a fortress, but an entire ceremonial city built where no city should logically exist, on a shallow lagoon. Its builders, the Soderlor dynasty, achieved something that still defies easy understanding. They constructed over 100 artificial islets, each a precise geometric platform, using colossal basalt logs. These logs are not small stones, but prismatic columns, some weighing many tons, quarried from the other side of the island. The effort to transport them remains one of the great puzzles of the ancient Pacific. Researchers suggest they may have been floated on rafts through the island's mangrove channels, a logistical feat requiring the coordination of hundreds, if not thousands, of people over generations. Once positioned on the reef, these massive stones were stacked log cabin style to form towering retaining walls, which were then filled with coral rubble to create stable, elevated land. The result was a grid of silent, canal-separated islands, a Venetian-like maze in the middle of the tropical sea. Each islet had a distinct purpose. Some held elaborate tombs for the ruling elite, their walls still imposing centuries later. Others were reserved for ceremonial food preparation, ritual gatherings, or the residences of priests and nobles. The central islet, Nan Madol, with its towering walls and hidden interior spaces, was likely the spiritual heart of the complex, a place where the dynasty's sacred authority was made manifest. Nan Madol was not a place for ordinary life. It was a theater of power, an artificial archipelago designed to physically and spiritually separate the ruling class from the common people who lived on the main island. To approach it by canoe, seeing those dark geometric forms materialize from the lagoon, was to witness the undeniable, almost supernatural authority of the Soderlors. Its construction was the ultimate act of territorial expansion, not by claiming new land, but by inventing a sacred, administrative territory from the sea itself, a stone declaration of a dynasty's right to rule both land and water. The logic of Nan Madol was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a vast, interconnected tradition that spanned the Pacific Ocean. From the mangrove coasts of Southeast Asia to the remote archipelagos of Polynesia and Melanesia, communities looked to the water not just as a source of food, but as a foundation for security and society. This gave rise to the widespread practice of stilt villages and fortified artificial islets, each a unique adaptation to the challenges and opportunities of island life. In New Zealand, the Maori developed the pa, a fortified settlement often situated on a strategically modified headland, but some were built on entirely artificial or enhanced islands in lakes and swamps. These were not just villages, they were intricate defensive systems. Builders would sculpt the land, creating deep ditches and towering terraced palisades, turning a natural promontory into a virtual island fortress. The approach was always pragmatic, using the available landscape to create a defensible perimeter that could protect the community during times of intertribal conflict. A similar drive for security shaped the coasts of Fiji and the Solomon Islands. Here, some communities constructed villages entirely on stilts over shallow lagoons, their longhouses connected by precarious-looking walkways that could be withdrawn if danger approached. In other cases, they built true artificial islets, piling coral and stone in sheltered waters to create small, circular platforms reserved solely for the chief's residence or as a last refuge. These specialized islets were powerful social tools. By physically separating the leader's home from the main village, they reinforced social hierarchy and created a space of both protection and prestige. The water acted as a moat, yes, but also as a symbol, a clear boundary between the chiefly lineage and the rest of the community. This architectural choice speaks to a world where status, safety, and identity were all intimately tied to one's relationship with the sea. Living over or on the water was not merely a practical solution to limited land. It was a deliberate cultural strategy, a way to organize society and navigate the complex currents of both ocean and human rivalry. Perhaps the most productive artificial islands ever created flourished not in a salty sea, but in a high-altitude lake. In the vast basin of Lake Texcoco, the Aztecs engineered a solution so elegant and fruitful it became the literal bedrock of their empire. The Chinampas were not defensive forts or chiefly enclaves, but something equally vital, floating gardens that fed a metropolis. The process was a masterpiece of sustainable engineering. Builders would first stake out long, rectangular plots in the shallow lakebed using a framework of woven reeds and wooden posts. This living lattice was then filled layer by layer with rich mud dredged from the lake bottom, alternating with layers of decaying vegetation and other organic matter. The result was not a true floating island, but a rooted, incredibly fertile raised bed, separated by canals just wide enough for a canoe. These canals were not merely waterways, they were integral to the system. The water kept the root zones perpetually moist, while the aquatic mud provided constant nutrients. Farmers could even grow willow trees at the corners of their plots, their roots naturally binding the Chinampa edges together against erosion. Over time, these garden islands became so stable and productive that families could build small huts right on them, living amid their crops. From these humble, reed-framed rectangles emerged an agricultural powerhouse. The Chinampas could yield up to 7 harvests a year, providing the maize, beans, squash, and flowers that sustained the glittering island city of Tenochtitlan, a city of perhaps 200,000 people at its height. This was expansion with a purpose beyond security or status. It was expansion for sheer sustenance. The parallel to coastal island builders is profound. Like the Crannog builders or the architects of Nan Madol, the Aztecs looked at a water-dominated landscape and saw potential for territory. But their genius was to channel that territorial drive into cultivation, transforming a lake into a vast, gridded farm that turned water and mud into food and flowers. It stands as a testament to human ingenuity meeting a fundamental need, proving that the most successful settlements are those that not only claim space from the water, but learn to make that space abundantly alive. While the Chinampas were rooted in the lakebed, another ancient tradition chose to float freely upon it. High in the Andes, on the vast, wind-swept expanse of Lake Titicaca, the Uros people maintain a living legacy of artificial island construction that stretches back centuries, perhaps even millennia. Their home is not built from stone or earth, but from the very reeds that grow in the shallow waters of the lake. The totora reed is the foundation of their entire world. To build an island, they begin by gathering the buoyant roots of the reeds, weaving them into thick, floating mats called kili. These mats are layered, one upon another, and anchored to the lake bottom with long poles and ropes to prevent them from drifting away with the strong altiplano winds. The entire platform, sometimes large enough for several families, is a living, breathing entity. As the bottom layers slowly rot in the water, new layers of fresh reeds are constantly added on top, a continuous cycle of maintenance and renewal. On this resilient, springy surface, they construct their homes, also made of bundled reeds, with arched roofs that resemble overturned boats. They build watchtowers, community spaces, and even small solar panels for modern needs, all resting on this organic foundation. Life here is intimately tied to the totora. The reeds are used for food, medicine, and to build the iconic balsas, the reed boats that serve as their taxis and fishing vessels. This is not a historical reenactment, but a vibrant, ongoing adaptation. The Uros Islands represent a profound understanding of a specific environment, a testament to human ingenuity that turns a single, abundant resource into an entire way of life. It is a powerful reminder that the ancient drive to create territory from water did not vanish with the Crannogs or Nan Madol, but continues, evolving and persisting, a direct conversation between a culture and the lake that sustains it. Far from any ocean, another civilization mastered the art of sculpting the earth to shape their world. In the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River and its tributaries, a series of sophisticated cultures arose, known today for their monumental earthen architecture. They built not with stone but with soil, basketload by basketload, constructing vast ceremonial landscapes that transformed the very terrain. The centerpiece of these complexes was the flat-topped mound, an artificial hill of staggering scale and purpose. At places like Cahokia, across the river from modern St. Louis, these mounds were not random piles of dirt. They were precisely engineered platforms, often with steep, grass-covered sides and broad, level summits. The largest, Monk's Mound, rises 100 feet high and covers over 14 acres at its base, a volume of earth that rivals the Great Pyramids of Egypt. To build it required a coordinated society moving millions of baskets of soil, likely over generations. While these mound centers were primarily on dry land, their placement was a deliberate act of territorial engineering within a dynamic, water-rich environment. Cahokia itself sat at the confluence of major rivers, a strategic and spiritually significant location. Many smaller mound sites were situated directly within wetlands or on natural levees near rivers, places prone to seasonal flooding. By raising these colossal earthen platforms, the builders were creating permanent, dry high ground in a landscape ruled by water. The summit of a great mound was sacred and exclusive space. Here, temples and the residences of leaders were constructed, physically elevating the spiritual and political elite above the everyday world. This vertical separation mirrored the social order, just as the water-moated islands did for Pacific chiefs. The mounds also served as astronomical observatories, calendar markers, and stages for public ceremonies that united the community. To approach Cahokia in its prime was to witness a skyline of human-made mountains, a testament to a society that could command the landscape itself. They expanded their territory not outward into a sea, but upward from the floodplain, forging a realm of ceremony and power from the very soil beneath their feet. The earthworks of Cahokia demonstrate a deliberate, monumental act of creation, but sometimes the most profound territorial shifts happen without a grand plan at all. Along ancient coastlines, from the mangrove swamps of Florida to the misty shores of the Pacific Northwest, communities expanded their world one meal at a time. They did this by creating shell middens, which are essentially ancient garbage piles composed of the discarded shells of oysters, clams, mussels, and other shellfish. For generations, families would return to the same spot by the water's edge to process their catch, piling the hard, durable shells in mounds that grew slowly, year after year, century after century. What began as a simple refuse heap could, over hundreds of years, transform into something remarkable, a substantial hill of white shell that rose well above the high tide line. In some places, these accumulations became so massive they formed actual islands, distinct landforms separate from the mainland. This was territorial expansion by accident, a habitable landscape emerging from the rhythms of daily sustenance. The shell itself was a perfect building material, compacting into a stable, well-drained foundation that resisted erosion. These midden islands, often located in rich estuaries, became prime real estate. They offered a dry, elevated place to build shelters, safe from flooding, and with a commanding view of the waterways for fishing and transport. The very substance of the island told a story of abundance, a literal mountain of evidence for a successful, enduring relationship with the sea. Researchers studying these sites find more than just shell. They uncover layers of history, tools, hearths, and ceremonial items mixed into the matrix, showing how a place for waste gradually became a place for life. These islands are a powerful reminder that human landscapes are not always designed. They are often grown, accumulating through countless small, everyday actions until they fundamentally reshape the coast itself. The sea was not an obstacle for the Phoenicians, it was their empire. This civilization of master mariners and shrewd traders built their wealth upon the waves, and their greatest engineering feats were dedicated to harnessing the sea's power for commerce and security. To achieve this, they perfected the art of port construction, often beginning with a small, strategic natural island and expanding it into a monumental artificial harbor complex. Their philosophy was clear: a perfect port was both an impregnable fortress and a bustling economic engine, a gateway they could control absolutely. The Phoenician city of Tyre, on the coast of modern Lebanon, provides the archetypal example. Originally founded on a small offshore island, its inhabitants performed a breathtaking feat of engineering. They connected their island city to the mainland by constructing a massive stone causeway, effectively turning their home into a peninsula and creating two sheltered harbors on either side. This transformed Tyre into an unassailable naval base. An enemy fleet would be forced to attack the narrow causeway under fire from the city walls, a nearly impossible task. Within those fortified harbors, the commercial lifeblood of the Mediterranean flowed. Ships from Egypt, Greece, and beyond docked at its quays to trade dyed purple cloth, precious glass, and cedar wood. The harbors were not just parking lots for ships, they were extensions of the city's streets, lined with warehouses, workshops, and markets, all protected by the encircling fortifications. This model of the fortified island port became a Phoenician signature, replicated across their trading network. On the island of Motia, off the western coast of Sicily, they created another powerful stronghold. They enhanced the natural island with massive stone docks and defensive walls that ran right into the shallow water, creating a secure base for their ships to dominate the trade routes between Italy and North Africa. The ultimate expression of this maritime vision, however, was built by their descendants, the Carthaginians. The great city of Carthage in present-day Tunisia boasted one of the ancient world's most ingenious harbor designs. At its heart lay the Carthon, an artificial, circular inner harbor reserved for the city's formidable navy. This was a completely man-made basin, dug out and lined with stone, surrounded by docks and ship sheds where hundreds of warships could be housed and repaired in total secrecy. An island stood in the center of this circular port, housing the admiral's headquarters. The entire complex was enclosed by a high wall, so from the sea, all that was visible was a blank, fortified perimeter. No outsider could count the ships or assess the fleet's readiness. Connected to this hidden naval fortress was a larger, rectangular commercial harbor, constantly filled with merchant vessels from across the known world. This two-harbor system separated military and economic functions while keeping both under the city's absolute protection. It was a physical manifestation of Carthaginian power, a statement that their security and their wealth were two sides of the same coin, forged from stone and seawater. For the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, building into the sea was not about creating new living space. It was about constructing the ultimate tool for control, a machine made of islands, breakwaters, and basins designed to command the Mediterranean itself. The Phoenician vision of the sea as a tool for control was inherited and magnified by a new wave of ambitious rulers. Following the conquests of Alexander the Great, a new era of monumental engineering dawned, one where entire coastlines were reshaped to serve the glory of burgeoning empires. This was the Hellenistic period, and its kings viewed harbor construction not merely as a practical necessity, but as a direct expression of their power and intellect. They sought to build not just ports but perfect, geometrically ordered gateways to their realms, protected by artificial landforms of staggering scale. To achieve this, they deployed armies of laborers and the latest engineering knowledge to perform a radical surgery on the coastline, constructing immense artificial peninsulas and breakwaters known as moles. These were not simple piles of rock, but carefully engineered barriers, often built with massive stone blocks, sometimes sunk in wooden caissons, designed to withstand the relentless force of the open sea. Their goal was to create vast, calm water harbors where none existed naturally, transforming exposed bays into bustling, defensible hubs of commerce and naval might. The island of Rhodes became a textbook example of this engineered ambition. Following a devastating earthquake in 226 before the Common Era, the Rhodians undertook a monumental rebuilding. Their city was famed for the Colossus, but its true genius lay in its harbors. They systematically improved their natural bays with massive stone moles, creating a series of specialized ports. The main commercial harbor was shielded by a long, curving breakwater, while a separate, smaller port was dedicated exclusively to the navy, a clear and strategic separation of function. These structures turned Rhodes into the preeminent trading center of the eastern Mediterranean, a fortress of commerce built literally from the seafloor up. Yet the most audacious harbor project of the age was conceived to feed the greatest city of the New World. Alexander himself chose the site for Alexandria in Egypt, but its potential was locked away without a safe anchorage. The coast was shallow and exposed, offering no natural harbor. The solution was an act of breathtaking audacity. Just offshore lay the island of Pharos. Alexandrian engineers, under the command of Alexander's successor Ptolemy, decided to connect this island to the mainland, thereby creating two immense sheltered basins. They built the Heptastadion, a causeway whose name means 7 furlongs, a solid, broad mole over a kilometer long. This man-made isthmus was a dual-purpose marvel. It served as a massive breakwater, calming the waters on both sides, and as a vital aqueduct and road link, bringing fresh water from the mainland to the island community. On one side lay the great harbor, the commercial and naval heart of Alexandria. On the other, the quieter Eunostos, or harbor of happy return, served the city's everyday needs. The island of Pharos, now anchored to the city, was crowned with its defining landmark, the Great Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This guiding beacon was the final, brilliant piece of the engineering puzzle, making the artificially created safe harbor visible from vast distances. Alexandria did not simply have a port, it was a port, a city whose entire identity and phenomenal wealth were born from a single, revolutionary act of connecting an island to the shore. This was territorial expansion redefined, not by claiming existing land, but by synthesizing a new, perfect coastline from which to rule the waves. Roman ambition did not stop at conquering land, it sought to conquer the sea itself. To feed the insatiable capital of Rome, Emperor Claudius initiated one of antiquity's most staggering harbor projects just north of the Tiber River's mouth. The existing port at Ostia was silting up, threatening the grain supply that kept 1 million Romans fed. The solution was Portus, a colossal artificial harbor basin dug from the coastline. Imagine a vast hexagonal lagoon over 200 acres in size, carved out of solid earth and connected to the sea by a wide channel. This was not a sheltered cove improved by moles, it was a harbor invented from nothing, an inland sea created by human hands. To protect its entrance from the fierce Tyrrhenian storms, engineers constructed 2 immense curving breakwaters that reached out into the open water like stone arms. At the tip of one, they built a lighthouse to rival Alexandria's. Within this calm, geometric lagoon, ships from across the Mediterranean could unload their cargoes of Egyptian grain, Spanish olive oil, and African wild animals directly onto warehouses that lined its edges. But the true marvel of Portus lay in what we cannot see today, the revolutionary material that made it possible. To build those breakwaters in the crashing surf, Roman engineers relied on a secret weapon, hydraulic concrete. This was no ordinary mortar. Its key ingredient was a volcanic ash called pozzolana, which, when mixed with lime and rubble, created a paste that would not dissolve in water. Instead, it would cure and harden chemically, even when submerged. Workers would build wooden forms directly on the seafloor, then pour this liquid stone into them. The mixture would set into a monolithic, water-resistant mass, bonding with the natural rock below. This allowed them to construct foundations and walls in the open sea, defying the very element they sought to tame. Portus became the maritime heart of Rome, a machine for empire built with a technology so advanced it would not be matched for over 1,000 years. It was a declaration that for Rome, the coastline was not a boundary, but a blank slate awaiting their signature in concrete and stone. That same revolutionary concrete enabled an even more audacious act of coastal creation far from Italy. On a featureless stretch of shoreline in Judea, King Herod the Great sought to build a monument to his power and loyalty to Rome. The result was Caesarea Maritima, a city centered around a harbor that was, in every sense, a complete fiction. There was no natural bay, no protective headland, only a straight, sandy coast pounded by Mediterranean waves. Undeterred, Herod's engineers designed an entire port from scratch, using Roman hydraulic concrete on an unprecedented scale. They began by fabricating the harbor's defining features, two massive breakwaters directly in the open sea. The southern one stretched over 2,000 feet, and the northern even longer. To build them, crews sailed out and sank enormous wooden boxes or caissons onto the seabed. Into these submerged forms, they poured the magic pozzolana concrete, creating a chain of durable, hollow blocks that sat on the seafloor. These blocks were then filled with more concrete and rubble, rising to form the breakwater's spine. On this man-made stone arm, they built towers, warehouses, and even a promenade. The scale was almost incomprehensible, the largest artificial harbor built in the open sea until the modern era. They named it Sebastos, the Greek equivalent of Augustus, a flattering tribute to the Roman emperor. Within its protected embrace, the harbor basin was dredged to a depth that could accommodate the largest ships of the day. The entire complex was a masterpiece of illusion and power. A perfect circular harbor with a temple to Augustus and Rome prominently placed on a high platform, visible to every ship that entered. Caesarea did not grow from a natural anchorage. It was imposed upon the coastline, a statement in stone and concrete that human will could manufacture not just a city, but the very conditions for its greatness. The harbor's eventual silting and collapse centuries later does not diminish the shock of its creation, a time when engineers looked at the relentless sea and decided to draw a new map, one where a king's legacy would be anchored in a harbor that never should have been. The legacy of Herod's concrete harbor would be inherited and refined by an empire facing constant threat from the sea. In Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, the security of the city was synonymous with the security of its harbors. While the city had natural advantages, its rulers engineered them into a system of unparalleled defense and control. The most famous of these was the harbor of Theodosius, later known as the Eleutherian Harbor, a massive artificial basin constructed in the 4th century. They built immense stone walls right into the water, creating fortified quays where the empire's formidable navy, the dromons, could be stationed. But the true innovation was less about creating new water and more about controlling access to it. The city's primary harbor, the Golden Horn, was protected by a legendary chain, a massive boom of forged iron links that could be stretched across its entrance from towers on either shore, sealing the fleet inside and any enemy fleet out. This was a harbor that could be closed like a gate. The entire waterfront was a continuous, towering seawall, a stone barrier against both waves and invaders. These were not public spaces, they were state-owned military-industrial complexes where shipyards, armories, and warehouses operated under imperial command. The harbor was less a place of open commerce and more a fortified launch point for power projection, a clear statement that the empire's survival depended on absolute mastery of the maritime approaches to its walls. This concept of the state-controlled, specialized naval base would find its ultimate expression centuries later and hundreds of miles to the west, in the Venetian lagoon, where the city itself was a miracle of adaptation. The Republic would concentrate its entire maritime might into a single, awe-inspiring district, the arsenal. Evolving from earlier scattered shipyards, the arsenal as we know it began to take shape in the 12th century. It was not a harbor for foreign trade, but a factory for Venetian power. The Republic systematically expanded into the lagoon, reclaiming land and water to create a vast, walled compound separate from the city's bustling heart. They dug new basins and canals, turning entire blocks of the lagoon into a sequential production line. This was the world's first integrated shipbuilding complex, a place where, at its peak, a fully equipped warship could be assembled and launched in a single day. Raw materials like timber, rope, and pitch would enter at one gate. Inside, specialized guilds worked in tightly coordinated sequence, the hull constructed in one covered shed, then floated through a canal to the next station for rigging, then to the next for armaments. The entire process was a state secret protected by high walls and guarded gates. The arsenal was more than a shipyard. It was the physical embodiment of Venetian sovereignty. Its existence allowed the Republic to maintain a standing navy without maintaining a standing army, to control trade routes not through land conquest, but through the relentless production of superior galleys. The workers, the arsenalotti, were a privileged class, living in adjacent neighborhoods and serving as both the city's firefighters and a loyal militia. This fortified island of industry within the lagoon represented a final evolution of the ancient idea. It was not a settlement for living, but a settlement for making the means of control. Venice expanded into the water not to create homes, but to create the very engines of its empire, proving that the most powerful territory one could build upon the waves was a factory for dominion. While empires built harbors for war and commerce, another culture sought to create islands for an entirely different purpose: beauty and contemplation. In the ancient Korean kingdom of Silla, centered in the city of Gyeongju, the aristocracy mastered a delicate art of landscape design, transforming water and earth into living poetry. Their most famous creation was the Anapji Pond, an artificial lake constructed in the 7th century within the grounds of the royal palace complex. This was not a project of territorial defense or agricultural necessity, but a deliberate act of aesthetic expansion. The pond itself was a carefully engineered basin, its banks lined with precisely cut stones and its waters fed by a sophisticated system of channels. But its soul lay in the 3 small, exquisitely placed artificial islands that rose from its calm surface. These were not the rugged, fortified mounds of a Crannog or the geometric platforms of Nan Madol. They were sculpted hills, gentle and verdant, designed to be perfect from every viewing angle. Each island served as a pedestal for an elegant wooden pavilion, their curved roofs reflected in the water below. These pavilions were stages for a refined elite culture, places for poetry readings, musical performances, and quiet conversation under the moon. The islands were connected to the shore and to each other by ornate stone bridges, creating a circuit for leisurely strolls that offered constantly shifting perspectives. This was a landscape of controlled perfection, a miniature world where every rock, every tree, and every sightline was meticulously planned. The very name Anapji, meaning pond of geese and wild ducks, evokes the idyllic scene the builders wished to craft, a harmonious sanctuary where nobility could escape the formalities of court and immerse themselves in an idealized nature of their own making. It represented a profound shift in intent. Here, the expansion into water was not driven by fear, hunger, or the need for control, but by a desire to create a separate realm of leisure and artistic expression, proving that the human urge to build upon water could also spring from the pursuit of pure, refined beauty. The pursuit of eternal legacy could reshape a landscape just as profoundly as the needs of the living. In ancient Japan, during the Kofun period from around the 3rd to the 7th century, a powerful elite expressed their authority through a breathtaking form of earthwork, the keyhole tomb. These were not simple burial mounds, but colossal, sculpted islands of earth, designed as the final resting places for paramount rulers. The most iconic shape is unmistakable, a large circular mound connected to a trapezoidal front, forming a giant keyhole when viewed from above. The scale is difficult to grasp until you stand before one. The largest, attributed to the semi-legendary Emperor Nintoku, stretches over 1,500 feet in length, covers nearly 80 acres, and is surrounded by 3 wide moats. Building such a monument required the coordinated labor of thousands of people over many years, moving millions of cubic feet of soil. The engineering was precise, with the mounds often aligned to specific celestial points and their slopes carefully graded. While many kofun were built on hills, a significant number were constructed on the flat coastal plains, in areas naturally rich with water. Here, the surrounding moats were not just symbolic ditches, they were expansive, water-filled barriers that transformed the entire complex into an artificial island. To approach the tomb of a great king, you would first cross a bridge over this solemn water, leaving the ordinary world behind to enter a sacred, separate realm reserved for the venerated ancestor. These moated islands served multiple profound purposes. They physically protected the sanctity of the site from disturbance. The water itself held spiritual significance, a purifying boundary between the world of the living and the eternal world of the revered departed. And on a practical level, in the wet plains, the moats helped manage groundwater and stabilize the massive earthen structure against subsidence. The kofun were more than tombs, they were the ultimate territorial markers. By claiming such a vast tract of fertile coastal plain and dedicating it solely to a monumental resting place, a ruling dynasty was making a permanent statement. They were asserting a timeless claim to the land, a declaration that their lineage was inseparable from the territory itself. The quiet, moated island became a permanent anchor of their legacy in the physical world, an eternal expansion of their presence crafted not from stone, but from the very earth and water of Japan. The quiet, moated islands of the kofun speak to a final, eternal form of territory, but across the sea, a different kind of waterborne life thrived with vibrant, everyday purpose. From the vast, shallow lakes of Cambodia to the sheltered bays of island archipelagos, the Stilt House village is a defining feature of Southeast Asia's cultural landscape, a living tradition of building upon the water that stretches from prehistory into the present day. While many such homes line riverbanks, the most striking examples are those where entire communities ventured far from the shore, constructing neighborhoods that float on a forest of wooden piles over calm lakes or placid seas. In places like Lake Toba in Indonesia or the coastal regions of the Philippines, this was not a tentative step into the shallows, but a full embrace of an aquatic world. The reasons for this choice were deeply practical, woven into the fabric of survival in a tropical climate. First and foremost, building over water provided a natural cooling system. The air moving beneath the raised floor created a constant breeze through the living space, offering relief from the stifling heat and humidity that blankets the land. This elevation also addressed critical matters of hygiene and health. By placing homes over water, waste could be managed more effectively, carried away from the living area by the currents below, which helped reduce pests and the spread of illness in an era before modern sanitation. The water itself served as a ready resource for cooking, cleaning, and bathing, integrated directly into the rhythm of daily life. But perhaps the most compelling reason was once again defense. A village built on stilts over a lake or a calm coastal bay presented a formidable challenge to any potential threat. Approaching silently was nearly impossible, as the water would betray the movement of boats. The only access was via narrow, easily monitored walkways or by canoe, giving the residents a commanding advantage. In times of conflict, these walkways could be removed or destroyed, isolating each home or the entire community as a temporary island fortress. This architectural choice fostered a unique relationship with the environment. Life was synchronized with the water's moods, the rhythms of fishing, and the sounds of lapping waves beneath the floorboards. The very structure of the community was shaped by it, with homes often clustered together for mutual support, connected by a web of planks that turned the settlement into a single, interconnected organism. To walk through such a village was to experience a world both apart and intimately connected, a testament to a simple, brilliant adaptation that turned the challenges of heat, health, and security into an opportunity to build a graceful, resilient life upon the water's ever-shifting surface. The fluid boundary between land and water becomes a way of life in the vibrant communities of Southeast Asia. In Vietnam's breathtaking Ha Long Bay, where limestone pillars rise like dragon's teeth from emerald waters, families have lived for generations not on the islands but between them. Their homes are floating wooden houses, often painted in bright blues and yellows, clustered together in small, bobbing villages. These are not anchored to the seabed but drift gently on the tide, secured by ropes and an intimate knowledge of the bay's moods. Entire lives unfold on these buoyant platforms. Children learn to swim before they walk, and the front porch is always a dock. The architecture is perfectly adapted, with wide, open lower levels for storing fishing nets and boats, and living spaces above to catch the breeze. While not fixed artificial islands, these clusters form a different kind of territory, a mobile, living archipelago that claims the water as its domain. The community expands and contracts with the needs of families, new floating structures joining the group, creating a settlement that can literally move to follow fish stocks or find calmer waters during a storm. It is a dynamic, responsive form of expansion where the concept of property is not a plot of earth, but a claim to a portion of the ever-shifting aquatic surface. This creates a unique social fabric where neighbors are literally tied together, and cooperation is not just beneficial, but essential for survival in a world without permanent foundations. The floating village is a testament to human flexibility, proving that territory can be defined not by static borders, but by presence, practice, and a shared rhythm with the water itself. The water's surface has always been a canvas for human ambition, a truth written clearly along the warm, shallow shores of the Arabian Gulf. Here, an ancient tradition of island building stretches back millennia, rooted in the practical needs of commerce and survival. Long before the glittering skyline of Dubai, the civilizations of this region looked at the sea and saw not a barrier but a foundation for prosperity. The Dilmun civilization, a powerful trading culture centered on what is now Bahrain from around 3,000 years before the Common Era, is often linked to this early impulse. While their most famous sites are on natural islands, the logic of their world was inherently maritime, relying on control of the sea lanes that connected Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley. It is easy to envision how such a culture, dependent on the water, might begin to shape it, building up small, strategic outposts or enhancing natural sandbanks to serve as way stations, trading posts, or pearling camps. Pearling itself, the centuries-old practice of diving for natural pearls, drove a more organic form of island creation. Seasonal pearling communities would establish temporary camps on low-lying sandbars and shoals. Over time, as crews returned year after year, they would gradually reinforce these spots, piling up stone, coral, and debris from their activities, slowly transforming a transient camp into a more permanent, though modest, artificial islet. These were not monumental constructions, but practical, accreted territories born from the rhythm of harvest and trade. They served as neutral ground for divers from different coastal towns, places to rest, repair boats, and sort the precious catch before the journey back to mainland markets. This slow, collective building from the seafloor up represents a deeply rooted relationship with the Gulf, where human endeavor and the marine environment were inextricably linked. This ancient impulse to claim territory from the sea finds a breathtaking modern echo just a short distance along the coast. The Palm Islands of Dubai are not merely engineering projects, they are philosophical descendants of that age-old drive, executed with 21st century technology and ambition. Where ancient builders used coral and stone, modern engineers use satellite-guided dredgers to suction millions of tons of sand from the seabed, spraying it into precise, predetermined shapes. The result is not a practical pearling camp or a modest trading outpost, but a vast, symbolic landscape. The Palm Jumeirah, with its fronds and crescent breakwater, is instantly recognizable from space, a deliberate icon of human will imposed upon the water. The scale is almost incomprehensible, involving enough material to build a wall that could circle the globe 3 times. Yet, the core motivation shares a family resemblance with the past. It is about expansion, creating valuable coastal real estate where none existed, and making a profound statement of identity and capability. The Palm Islands and projects like the World Archipelago are the contemporary expression of a very old idea that a society's destiny can be shaped by its ability to redefine its own coastline. They transform the sea from a simple resource into a platform for prestige, tourism, and global attention. While the tools and the stakes have changed dramatically, the foundational vision remains: to look at the endless blue and decide to draw a new line, to build not just on the water, but with it, crafting a permanent legacy from the shifting sands of the sea itself. The story of waterborne settlements is a global one, and Africa's vast inland seas hold their own silent chapters. Across the continent, from the immense, shallow basin of Lake Chad to the shores of Lake Victoria, archaeological clues point to a long and sophisticated history of communities living on and with the water. These were not the stone citadels of Europe or the geometric marvels of the Pacific, but adaptations born from the unique rhythms of Africa's Great Lakes and their surrounding wetlands. The evidence, though often subtle and challenging to uncover, suggests a pattern of life where the boundary between land and water was deliberately blurred. In the Lake Chad Basin, a region that has dramatically expanded and contracted over millennia, researchers have identified sites indicating the use of piled foundations. These are the echoes of stilt houses or raised platforms, built to adapt to the seasonal flooding and shifting shorelines that defined life in this immense inland delta. Similarly, around Lake Victoria, oral histories and scattered archaeological finds hint at communities that built out over the water, using wooden posts driven into the lakebed to create stable bases for homes above the waves. These settlements were likely hubs of fishing, trade, and agriculture, taking advantage of the rich resources found where the water met the land. Preserving the physical proof of these aquatic cultures presents a profound challenge. Unlike the stone blocks of Scotland or the concrete harbors of Rome, these structures were built primarily from organic materials, wood, reeds, and earth. In the warm, wet environments of tropical Africa, such materials decay rapidly, leaving behind only the faintest traces for archaeologists to interpret. Often, the most telling evidence is not a preserved house, but a pattern of dark soil stains in the ground, the ghostly outlines of ancient post holes that once held the supporting piles of a village now long vanished. These post molds, arranged in circles or rectangles, are like footprints in time, indicating the layout of homes and the scale of a community that chose to build over the water. The acidic soils and fluctuating water levels can also erode or obscure other artifacts, making the full picture difficult to assemble. This scarcity of physical evidence has, until recently, left these aquatic traditions somewhat in the shadows of historical study, a whispered rather than shouted part of the continent's narrative. Yet, these whispers are growing louder, urging a reconsideration of Africa's architectural heritage. The presence of these pile structures suggests that the drive to create territory from water was not confined to any single continent or culture, but a widespread human response to specific environmental opportunities. The communities of the Lake Chad Basin, for instance, were mastering an unpredictable landscape. By building on pilings, they could maintain permanent settlements in a region where shorelines moved and floods were annual events, ensuring their homes remained dry and secure regardless of the season. Around Lake Victoria, such constructions would have provided direct access to deep water fishing grounds, cooler air, and a degree of natural defense. This points to a deeper, understudied history of innovation. It suggests that across Africa, societies developed their own sophisticated forms of aquatic engineering, perfectly tailored to their local conditions. Recognizing these lake dwellings expands our understanding of human ingenuity, revealing a continent where the relationship with water was not merely one of resource extraction, but of creative coexistence and territorial invention. Each pattern of post holes is a quiet testament to a community that looked at a restless lake and saw not an obstacle, but a foundation for their future. The materials these builders chose tell a story of both necessity and profound ingenuity. Across the world, the selection was a direct conversation with the local environment, a testament to using what the landscape offered to defy the water's limits. In the peat-rich lochs of Scotland, timber and brushwood were the logical medium, woven into sturdy crannog foundations that compacted over time into resilient, organic mounds. The Alpine pile dwellers also turned to the surrounding forests, driving thousands of wooden piles into soft lakebeds to create stable platforms, their engineering relying on the buoyancy and strength of carefully selected trees. Where stone was abundant, it became the language of permanence. The brock builders of Scotland's coasts worked with dristone masonry, fitting rocks without mortar into towers that could withstand Atlantic gales, while the terra-mare builders of Italy used earth and clay, piling it into vast, planned platforms on the floodplain. In the Pacific, the choices grew even more specialized. The builders of Nan Madol worked with a geological puzzle, quarrying immense prismatic basalt logs, while others on coral atolls learned to harvest and stack porous coral rubble, a material lightweight yet stable when packed together. And in the highest lakes, the Uros people demonstrated a masterful use of a single, renewable resource, weaving buoyant totora reeds into entire floating islands that required constant, gentle renewal. Each material presented its own challenges and dictated its own form of engineering, from the stacked stone geometry of a brock to the living, breathing mat of a reed island. The true measure of these projects, however, lies not just in the material, but in the monumental logistics of gathering and moving it. Consider the silent, back-breaking labor implied by a single crannog. Every stone, every timber, every basket of soil had to be gathered, likely by an extended family or small clan, and then transported by boat to the building site in the loch. This was a generational investment, a slow accumulation that turned a household's daily effort into a permanent homeland. The scale expands dramatically with sites like the Terra-Mare Mounds or the Great Platform Mounds of Cahokia. These were not family projects but societal ones. Moving millions of baskets of earth requires coordination, a system for feeding and organizing large workforces, and a social hierarchy capable of commanding such effort, likely during seasonal breaks from farming. This points to a highly organized community with shared goals and a clear chain of command. Then there are the cases that seem to defy logistical possibility, none more so than Nan Madol. The mystery of how its builders moved those multi-ton basalt logs across the island of Pohnpei remains a subject of intense debate. The prevailing theory involves a breathtaking feat of coordination. Workers would have quarried the columns, then likely maneuvered them onto large bamboo or log rafts. During high tide or through clever use of the island's mangrove channels, these rafts, bearing stones heavier than elephants, would be floated to the construction site on the reef. This operation would have required not just hundreds of strong arms, but expert knowledge of tides, currents, and raft dynamics. It speaks to a society with sophisticated engineering knowledge, capable of project management on a scale that rivals the building of a pyramid. The labor was likely organized in a rotational system, perhaps tied to social obligation or religious duty, turning the act of construction itself into a ritual that bound the community to the sacred site they were creating. Beneath all this effort lay a deep, often unspoken, understanding of the water itself. These were not random piles in a lake, they were carefully engineered responses to hydrological forces. The Crannog builders understood where to place their mounds to avoid the strongest currents, and where the lake bed was firm enough to support the weight. The pile dwellers of the Alps knew which woods resisted waterlogging and how deep to drive their posts to find stable ground beneath the soft silt. The Aztec Chinampa farmers possessed an intimate knowledge of lake depth, water chemistry, and canal flow to keep their floating gardens fertile. This was applied science gained through generations of observation and trial. They understood foundation stability, the need for proper drainage within their mounds, and how to use weight and compaction to prevent their islands from simply sinking into the mud or being washed away by the first storm. Their success, measured in centuries of habitation, stands as a quiet testament to this accumulated wisdom. They looked at the water, understood its rules, and then devised a way to build a new set of rules upon it, creating territories that endured not through brute force alone, but through a harmonious, hard-won dialogue with the element they sought to inhabit. These silent islands rising from the water are more than feats of engineering, they are profound social statements. To understand what they truly meant, we must look past the stones and timber to the people who moved them. The very existence of an artificial island settlement is a clear signal of a complex, organized society. This was not a project for a single family or a small, scattered village. The scale of effort required to quarry, transport, and position thousands of tons of material speaks of a community capable of extraordinary coordination. It implies a central authority, whether a chief, a council of elders, or a priestly class with the power to command labor, organize supplies, and see a vision through across seasons, even generations. This mobilization of workforce is the first great revelation. Building a Crannog required the sustained effort of a kinship group for years. Constructing the platforms of Nan Madol or the Mounds of Cahokia demanded the coordinated labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, likely drawn from across a wide territory. This tells us these societies had surplus food to support non-farming workers, systems of social obligation or shared belief to motivate them, and the logistical skill to manage such an undertaking. The island itself becomes a physical measure of a leader's influence, a monument built not from carved stone, but from the collective effort they could summon and direct. Beyond demonstrating power, these structures were masterful tools for shaping and reinforcing the social order. Their design often physically etched hierarchy into the landscape. Consider the clear separation they created. In many cases, these artificial lands were exclusive enclaves, accessible only to a chosen few. The elite residential islets of Nan Madol, surrounded by canals, were literally set apart from the main island where commoners lived. To reach them required permission, or at the very least, a boat and a reason to be there. this physical separation made social boundaries tangible and unmistakable. Similarly, the great platform mounds of Cahokia elevated the temples and homes of the ruling class high above the thatched roofs of the ordinary citizens. To ascend the mound was a ritual act, moving closer to the realm of the sacred and the powerful. The water or the steep earthen slope acted as a barrier, creating a space of privilege and mystery. This separation served multiple purposes. It provided security for the ruling class, certainly, but it also cultivated an aura of sanctity and difference. By living in a place that was human-made, often aligned with celestial events or sacred geometries, the elites associated themselves with the forces of creation and cosmic order. They weren't just leaders, they were intermediaries between the community and the spiritual world, a role reinforced by their unique address. The artificial island or mound became a stage for ritual, a controlled environment where the elite could perform ceremonies that affirmed their right to rule. The very difficulty of construction added to this mystique. If only the gods or divinely inspired leaders could command such a transformation of the natural world, then those who lived on that transformed land shared in that divine connection. In this way, the settlement was more than a home. It was a permanent, undeniable advertisement for the social structure, teaching every member of society their place simply by its imposing, separated presence on the water or against the sky. These monumental acts of creation never occurred in a vacuum. Every stone placed, every basket of earth piled, sent ripples through the delicate balance of the surrounding environment. The construction of an artificial island was, by its very nature, an intervention, a redirection of natural processes that could have profound and lasting effects on the local ecosystem. In the short term, the impact was immediate. Gathering vast quantities of stone, timber, or coral from nearby shores and forests would have visibly scarred the landscape, altering habitats and resource availability. The process of dredging or piling material into the water inevitably changed water flow patterns. Sediment, stirred up during construction, could cloud the water for extended periods, affecting sunlight penetration and the health of aquatic plants and fish populations that communities often relied upon for food. In some cases, the very success of a harbor or settlement sowed the seeds of its own challenge. The massive breakwaters at Portus or Caesarea, while creating calm basins for ships, also disrupted the natural longshore currents that moved sand along the coast. This often led to accelerated siltation within the harbor itself, a relentless, slow-motion battle where dredging became a permanent, costly necessity to maintain the depth they had fought so hard to create. Similarly, the network of canals in a Chinampas system or a Stilt village, while brilliant for transport and agriculture, could sometimes alter the natural flushing of a lake or estuary, potentially leading to changes in water quality over very long periods. These were unintended consequences, the hidden trade-offs of reshaping a coastline or a lakebed. The builders were masters of their immediate goal, but the full, long-term ecological script was one they could not entirely foresee. Yet, to view these projects solely as disruptions is to miss a deeper, more fascinating truth. In countless instances, these settlements were not assaults on nature, but profound acts of symbiosis. They represent some of humanity's earliest and most ingenious forms of sustainable adaptation, turning environmental challenges into strategic advantages. Consider the context. A community building a crannog in a Scottish loch was not choosing an easy, empty plot on dry land. They were likely responding to pressure, perhaps a lack of secure, defensible territory, or competition for prime agricultural soil. The loch, with its ready supply of building materials like stone and timber from its shores, and its natural moat, presented a solution. They worked with the environment, using its resources to create a secure niche within it. The Aztec Chinampa is the ultimate example of this adaptive genius. faced with a growing population and limited arable land on the swampy lake margins, they did not drain Lake Texcoco. Instead, they embraced its fertility by recycling nutrient-rich lake muck and decaying vegetation. They created a perpetually renewing agricultural system that turned a perceived wasteland into the most productive farmland in the ancient Americas. The raised beds prevented waterlogging of crops, while the canals provided irrigation, transport, and a habitat for aquatic life that could be harvested. It was a closed-loop ecosystem of their own design, amplifying the lake's natural abundance rather than depleting it. Similarly, the stilt villages of Southeast Asia or the Uros reed islands are direct, elegant responses to local conditions. Building over the water provided cooling breezes in a tropical climate, managed waste, and offered protection from land-based threats and floods. These structures used locally abundant, renewable materials like mangrove wood or totora reeds, and their design minimized their footprint on the often fragile shoreline ecology. They were not imposing an alien form on the landscape, but evolving a lifestyle from it, a dialogue between human need and environmental possibility. These settlements teach us that the most enduring human habitats are often those that listen to the constraints of their setting and find a way to innovate within them. They looked at a floodplain and saw not just danger but the opportunity for fertile, raised platforms. They looked at a coral reef and saw not just a navigational hazard but a quarry for building a sacred city. They looked at a windswept loch and saw not an empty expanse but a canvas for a fortified home. This reframing of limitation into advantage is perhaps their greatest legacy, a lesson in resilience written in stone, earth, and wood upon the water. Yet for all their ingenuity, these aquatic kingdoms often carried the seeds of their own undoing within their very design. The same water that provided defense, sustenance, and identity could, over time, become an agent of profound vulnerability. A recurring pattern emerges from the silent ruins, a convergence of environmental pressures and human limits that led many of these remarkable settlements to be abandoned. Often, the first and most relentless challenge came from the water itself, but in a different form than the builders had mastered. Rising sea levels, a slow and inexorable force, presented a threat that ancient engineering could not ultimately repel. As ocean waters crept higher, low-lying artificial islands and coastal platforms found themselves gradually submerged, their protective walls breached by storm surges with increasing frequency. The freshwater lenses beneath small islands, vital for drinking and agriculture, could become contaminated by saltwater intrusion, poisoning the very lifeblood of the community. This was not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, grinding pressure that eroded viability over generations, forcing a reluctant retreat to higher ground. Alongside the rising waters, another aquatic process often sealed a settlement's fate: siltation. This was the quiet killer of harbors and canals. The magnificent artificial ports of the ancient world, like Portus or Caesarea Maritima, were engineering marvels, but they fought a perpetual and ultimately losing battle against sediment. Rivers carrying silt would deposit their loads in the calm waters behind breakwaters, gradually filling the basins. Maintaining navigable depth required constant, expensive dredging, a task that could overwhelm a society if its political will or economic power waned. When the harbor silted up, the reason for the city's existence vanished. Trade routes shifted, wealth dried up, and the meticulously engineered waterfront was left stranded, slowly becoming landlocked and obsolete. Inland, a similar process could choke the life from a settlement. The intricate canal networks of Chinampas systems or stilt villages required careful maintenance to prevent them from filling with aquatic vegetation and silt. If social organization broke down, or if labor was redirected to more immediate crises, these vital waterways could turn from arteries into clogged, stagnant ditches, undermining the agricultural or sanitary foundation of the community. The infrastructure of the settlement itself could become a source of fragility. Many of these projects depended on a massive initial investment of local resources, particularly timber. The Crannogs, pile dwellings, and harbor works consumed vast quantities of wood. In some cases, this led to a depletion of the surrounding forests, a deforestation that could have cascading effects. Without tree roots to stabilize soils, erosion could increase, ironically accelerating the siltation of nearby waters. The loss of timber also meant the loss of a crucial material for repairing homes, boats, and fortifications, making the community more vulnerable to the next storm or conflict. And storms were a constant existential threat. An artificial island or stilt village, while strategically brilliant, was often acutely exposed. A severe storm surge or tsunami could sweep over low-lying platforms, scattering buildings and inhabitants. The archaeological record at some coastal sites shows evidence of violent destruction followed by rebuilding, a cycle of resilience that could only be sustained for so long. A society might recover from one disaster, but repeated blows could exhaust its capacity to respond, leading to a gradual dispersal of the population. Ultimately, the survival of these complex settlements was inextricably tied to the health of the society that built them. They were not just collections of buildings, but physical manifestations of a social order, economic system, and political will. When that socio-political foundation cracked, the artificial territory often could not endure. The terra-mare settlements of northern Italy present a haunting example. These planned, grid-like platforms thrived for centuries, demonstrating remarkable social cohesion. Then, quite abruptly, they were all abandoned. Researchers suggest that the very sophistication of their society may have contributed to its vulnerability. A highly centralized system, dependent on careful management of resources and labor, can be brittle. A shift in climate that affected crop yields, an interruption in long-distance trade networks, or internal social unrest could have cascaded through the system, leading to a rapid collapse. Once the authority and organization needed to maintain the complex platform dwellings and their drainage systems dissolved, the settlements would have quickly become untenable, reverting to malarial swamps. A similar story of societal unraveling is echoed at Nan Madol. The sheer effort required to build and maintain that stone city suggests a powerful, centralized authority capable of commanding labor and resources. Historical traditions speak of the oppressive rule of the Sodalor dynasty, which may have sown resentment. When that ruling power was finally challenged and overthrown, the intricate social machine that sustained Nan Madol ground to a halt. The specialized knowledge, the organized labor pools, and the economic system that supported the elite on their artificial islets dissipated. Without that constant upkeep, the canals clogged with mangrove, the structures began to crumble, and the sacred city was left to the jungle and the sea, a magnificent relic of a power structure that could not sustain itself. Their decline reminds us that the most vulnerable part of any human settlement is not its walls against the water, but the fragile, intricate web of cooperation and shared purpose that holds the community itself together. When that web unravels, even the most solid stone eventually returns to the silence from which it came. The silence of these abandoned islands is not an ending, but a whisper that carries across centuries. Their legacy is not measured in ruins alone, but in the persistent human desire to redraw the map, a conversation between past ambition and present possibility. We stand today at the culmination of this ancient dialogue, wielding technologies those early builders could scarcely dream of, yet answering the same fundamental call. Modern land reclamation is the direct descendant of the Crannog and the Chinampa, scaled to a planetary level and driven by global necessity. In the Netherlands, a nation famously wrested from the North Sea, the philosophy is one of defense and survival. The Delta Works, a vast system of storm surge barriers and dikes, represents not just reclamation, but an ongoing, sophisticated negotiation with the water, a promise to hold back the sea that echoes the turf mound builders of the same coast millennia earlier. On the other side of the world, the island city-state of Singapore presents a different chapter. With limited natural land, it has expanded its territory by over 20% through systematic reclamation, importing sand and rock to create new districts, ports, and airports. This is expansion driven by economic imperative and demographic pressure, a modern echo of the ancient communities that built into the water to support a growing population. And then there is Dubai, where the ambition is not merely practical but symbolic, crafting archipelagos in the shape of palms and continents, transforming the sea into a canvas for luxury and global identity. These projects, for all their scale, share a profound kinship with Nan Madol or the harbors of ancient Tyre. They are statements of power, feats of collective will, and solutions to the eternal challenges of space, security, and prestige. So is the drive fundamentally different today. The tools have transformed from baskets and rafts to dredge ships and satellite surveys. The motivations now intertwine with global finance, tourism, and climate resilience. Yet the core impulse remains eerily familiar: to look at the boundless blue and see not a limit but an invitation. It is the same human instinct to secure a future, to create order from chaos, and to leave a mark upon the world that will endure. The ancient builders worked with the rhythm of the tides and the strength of their communities. We work with concrete and computer models, but we are still answering that same deep question. How do we build a home where nature did not intend one? The conversation between humanity and the sea continues, and we are still learning the language first spoken by those who piled the first stone into the quiet waters of a forgotten loch. From the misty lochs of Scotland to the sunlit reefs of the Pacific, this shared story of creation reveals a fundamental truth about our species. Repeatedly, independently, and with astonishing ingenuity, cultures across the globe chose to expand their world by building directly upon the water. They looked at the sea, the lake, or the river not as a boundary but as a new kind of territory waiting to be shaped. The motivations were as varied as the landscapes, from the urgent need for security in a Crannogs' wooden walls to the spiritual authority carved into the basalt of Nan Madol, from the practical abundance of a Chinampa garden to the sheer commercial control of a Phoenician harbor. Yet beneath this diversity lies a common thread of human ambition, a relentless drive to solve the problems of space, safety, and society by engaging directly with the aquatic realm. These were not acts of retreat but profound declarations of presence. They tell us that when faced with a challenge, whether it be a lack of land, a threat from rivals, or a desire to connect with the sacred, our ancestors did not simply adapt to their environment. They often chose to reinvent it, stone by stone, basket by basket, until a new piece of the world emerged from the waves. This legacy speaks to a deep-seated resilience and a boundless capacity for innovation. It reminds us that human history is not just written on land, but is also etched into the coastlines and lakebeds we engineered ourselves. These silent, waterborne settlements ask us to reconsider where home can be and what it means to build a future. They stand as enduring testaments to the idea that our greatest structures often arise from a conversation with the elements, a dialogue between need and possibility that continues to shape our world today. What other ancient engineering marvels, hidden in plain sight, do you think hold similar lessons about human ingenuity? Share your thoughts below.